Okay, it's called The Occupation of Hong Kong and the Life of a Veteran. Oops. Okay, here we go. To provide you with some background, in 1841, after losing the First Opium War, China ceded Hong Kong Island to Great Britain. The city of Victoria on the island became its capital. In 1860, China ceded Kowloon on the mainland to Great Britain. In 1853, when the resident British troops were reassigned to fight in the Crimean War, Lieutenant Colonel William Kane advocated the creation of a civilian defense force, and the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps, also known as, quote, the Volunteers, was established in 1854. In 1898, Hong Kong acquired property known as the New Territories on the mainland, along with outlying islands under a 99-year lease with China to expire on July 1st, 1997. My father, Henry Souza, was born in Hong Kong in July 1921. In 1938, at the age of 17, he joined the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps. Here's a picture of him in 1939 when he was a member of the 3rd Battery, consisting of coastal 6-inch guns. During that time, there were 3 banks issuing circulating currency in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. Here's an example of its 1935 $1 banknote and its $5 banknote of 1941. Another bank was the Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China. And here's an example of this 1941 $5 banknote and its $10 banknote issued also in 1941. And finally, the last currency issuing bank was the Mercantile Bank of India. And here's an example of a $5 banknote, also dated 1941. The government of Hong Kong also issued its own note, and here's an example of the $1 note issued in 1940 and 1941. At that time, there are only 3 coins in circulation: the 1 cent, 5 cent, and 10 cents. All coins were minted in England and shipped to Hong Kong. When war began in Europe in 1939, Japan had already been at war with China since 1937. To protest the invasion of China and to curb its military expansion, an oil embargo was imposed against Japan. Hong Kong newspaper accounts from 1939 hinted that war with Japan was inevitable. Sometime between 1939 and 1941, my father was posted to the Field Ambulance Unit of the Volunteers. On February 26, 1941, Hong Kong issued 6 stamps to commemorate the 100th anniversary of British sovereignty over Hong Kong. Almost a year later, the Japanese Army would celebrate its occupation of Hong Kong. That same year, Hong Kong began to experience a shortage of 1 cent, 5 cent, and 10 cent coins, and the government claimed that these coins were being smuggled to Shanghai and sold to Japanese agents for their metal to assist the Japanese in their war effort. In May 1941, the Hong Kong government had to issue 1 cent paper notes, and later in October, they also issued 5 cent and 10 cent notes to cover the shortage. All these notes were uniface. War began on December 8, 1941, when 52,000 soldiers of the Japanese 23rd Army swarmed across the border from China into Hong Kong. To oppose them were 14,000 Allied soldiers consisting of Canadian, British, and volunteer units. In 40 hours, they overcame the defenses held by British forces along the Shin Mun Redoubt, which is over here, and the Gin Drinkers line, defined by the zigzag red lines on this map. The city of Kowloon on the mainland fell to the Japanese on December 12th, and the remaining defenders retreated to Hong Kong Island. Now, if any of you have been to Hong Kong, you'll recognize the iconic clock tower at the ferry terminal. It's still there. When the British were under siege on Hong Kong Island, there emerged a shortage of coins and $1 banknotes. The shortage of the $1 banknotes arose when the Japanese distributed leaflets warning that all notes over $10 would be worthless after the Japanese took over the colony. To relieve the situation, a stock of the Bank of China 5 yuan notes were discovered on the premises of the Commercial Press Limited in King Road, North Point. These notes were overprinted Hong Kong government $1 and released for circulation on the 13th of December. The Japanese successfully invaded Hong Kong Island on December 18th and split the Allied forces consisting of British units, Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps units, and Canadian troops. It was during one of the battles on December 19th that Sergeant Major John Osborne of the Winnipeg Grenadiers was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross when he threw himself on top of a Japanese grenade to save the lives of his men. This was the only Victoria Cross awarded during the battle. By December 24th, the Japanese had captured most of Hong Kong Island. On Christmas Day, 1941, the Allied troops were ordered by the Governor Mark Young to surrender. The order reads, to Brigadier Wallace, the GOC, which means General Officer Commanding, authorizes me to state that the white flag will be hoisted and all military operations will cease forthwith. You will consider yourselves prisoners of war. Issue orders to all commands to cease fighting. Steward for GOC, British forces in China. At that time, my father was in Fort Stanley, situated in the southern part of the island. This Japanese propaganda postcard depicts the surrender talks between Governor Mark Young and Japanese Lieutenant General Takashi Sakai on Christmas Day. My father and the other Allied troops became POWs and were sent to Samshui prisoner of war camp on the mainland. The Japanese prepared an index card on each POW, and at the end of the war, these records were seized and kept at the National Archives in the UK. In 2016, when I visited London, I went to the National Archives and found my father's POW card. The English translations of the Japanese entries are in red. The reverse provides the details of his incarceration. The middle of the card states that on 1943, July 25th, he was hospitalized for chronic bronchitis and was discharged from hospital on 1943, August 13th. The top of the card indicates that on 1944, May 14th, he was transferred to the Tokyo Camp Administration from Hong Kong, and later on 1945, August 14th, to the Sendai Camp Administration. The bottom of the card states that at the end of the war in 1945, September 9th, he was transferred to a Captain Kenderwood at Port Yumoto. I will have more on this part of his life later. This photo shows Lieutenant General Sakai entering Hong Kong in his victory parade. He became the second military governor of Hong Kong until February 1942 and retired from active service. Hideo Inouye was a second-generation Japanese Canadian born in Kamloops, British Columbia. He was studying in Japan when the war began, and in May 1942, he was recruited as an interpreter and sent to Samshui POW camp in Hong Kong. Inouye was also a member of the Kempe Tai, the Japanese equivalent of the German Gestapo, and was particularly cruel towards towards the Canadian prisoners. The prisoners nicknamed him the Kamloops Kid and Slap Happy due to his penchant for slapping prisoners for no reason. The coinage for Hong Kong was also affected by the war. All Hong Kong coins were minted in England, and according to the records at the British Royal Mint, there were 5 shipments of the 1941 1-cent coins. After the war started, 1 shipment was unloaded in South Africa, returned to the mint, and melted down. The fate of the remaining 4 shipments is unknown, and there are rumors that 1 shipment was sunk by a German or Japanese submarine, and another shipment was captured by the Japanese in Hong Kong and melted down for the war. None of the 5-cent coins destined for Hong Kong were shipped, and most were melted down for the nickel to be used in a war effort. Surviving specimens are some of the rarest of Hong Kong coins. These stamps were printed in 1941 by Bradbury Wilkinson, but due to the start of the war, they could not be delivered to Hong Kong until after the liberation. The official issue date for this series was changed to 28th August 1946. After the victory, the Japanese used the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank building as its headquarters for the administration of Hong Kong. The Japanese soldiers shot 1 bank official to intimidate the others to open the vaults. In the vault, there were unissued banknotes totaling $119,800,000. Although half of these notes were already signed, they had no value because the bank had not yet acquired the reserves that were required by law before they could be issued. In any event, the Japanese forced the bank officials to issue them. These issued notes became known as duress notes. The notes consisted of this 1934 issue of the $50 note and the 1934, 1936, and 1937 issues of the $100 note and the 1936 and 1937 issues of the $500 note. When the war ended, all these duress notes were honored by the bank, even though technically they had no value. The Japanese issued an order limiting the use of Hong Kong currency to $10 and introduced the military yen to the population. The Japanese reopened the Hong Kong branch of the Yokohama Specie Bank and made it the official issuer of the military yen. Citizens were required to exchange Hong Kong currency at a rate of $2 Hong Kong for 1 military yen. For a short while, Hong Kong currency was allowed to circulate with the military yen. The initial 3 military yen were overprinted notes printed in August 1938 for use in southern China. The red overprints crossed out the name Bank of Japan, and the 4 characters identified them as Japanese Imperial Government military notes. The 3 notes in the series were 1 yen, 5 yen, and 10 yen. Later, the Japanese also circulated the first series, which was printed in December 1938. These 3 notes omitted the name Bank of Japan and incorporated the previously overprinted inscription into the design. Again, they were 1 yen, 5 yen, and 10 yen. The second series included notes of a smaller size and small denominations that were printed in November 1940. These notes have 11 characters along the top that translate as Imperial Japanese Government Military Note and had no serial numbers. They consisted of the 1 sen, the 5 sen, 10 sen, sen, 1 yen, 5 yen, and the 10 yen. A third series of notes similar to the second series notes were also issued. The only difference between the third series notes and the second series notes is that these notes have 7 characters along the top. Here, 7 characters along the top instead of 11, and have serial numbers, noted by this number 38 here. The removal of 4 of the characters deleted the reference to military notes. The issue notes were 1 sen, 5 sen, 10 sen, 50 sen, 1 yen, 5 yen, 10 yen, and finally 100 yen. This banknote with a denomination of 2.5 rin was printed but never issued for use. This example was offered at a recent John Bull auction for $12,000 and did not sell. On July 24, 1942, the military yen was revalued at $4 Hong Kong to 1 military yen, and the military yen was made the sole legal tender in Hong Kong. The Japanese severely punished anyone caught using Hong Kong dollars. Slide is of an undated Hong Kong overprint on a Chinese 20-cent note sold at a recent auction. Slide is of a Hong Kong overprint on a Chinese 10 yuan note dated 1942, also sold at the same auction. Although very little information was provided on these 2 notes by the auction house, Joseph Bowling and C. Frederick Schwann's book entitled World War II Remembered describes these 2 notes as fantasies printed by the South China Expedition Army based in Canton. The text lines say, Hong Kong government, temporary currency to circulate at face value, printed and issued by the commanding officer, Japan's South China Expeditionary Army. The last line of each note lists the date in Japanese, or a year, or nothing.
Oh, can I introduce something here, please?
Yes, Joseph.
So, we didn't say that they were printed by the South China Expeditionary Army. These didn't come out until the 1980s. These were made specifically to sell to collectors. They were never current at the period.
Oh, is that right? Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. Good to know. When I saw it in the auction, they didn't say when they came out, when they were printed. So I just assumed that it was also issued at the same time. But thank you for clarifying. The Japanese also introduced plenty of their definitive stamps for use in Hong Kong. These are just examples of the stamps used, but these are not cancelled in Hong Kong. The last 3 stamps on the bottom right were overprinted with new values and issued in 1945. Here's an example of a Hong Kong occupation mail using the Japanese stamps. On December 8, 1942, the first anniversary of the war, the Japanese issued a set of 2 pictorial postcards. One depicted the Hong Kong race course, and the other depicted the sinking of the British training ship HMS Tamar that was moored in Hong Kong harbor when the war began. On the same day, the Japanese also issued 3 postcards to their soldiers to commemorate the first anniversary of the war. The 3 postcards came in a paper folder with a note explaining each of the postcards. The first postcard commemorated the attack on Pearl Harbor. On the reverse, all 3 postcards have the same printed stamp value of 2 sen and the image of a samurai warrior. The second postcard commemorated the attack and capture event of an anti-aircraft battery in Hong Kong. And the third postcard commemorated the British surrender of Singapore. Between 1942 and 1944, the Japanese issued several postcards for the public's use. They are very plain with a printed value in the corner. This one is with a 2-cent value below the image of a mounted warrior. This postcard is one with a 10-cent stamp depicting the Nagoya Castle. This postcard with the original 2-cent value was overprinted with a 1.5 yen overprint and is believed to have been issued later in the war. I have very little information about these two postcards. They are described in the catalog as military affairs postcards, and on one, the stamp value is replaced with a picture of a perched dove, and on the other, a 5-pointed star. In 1944, the Japanese issued 3 100 military yen notes for use. Here we have the 1944 100 military yen in the style of the overprint series. And that was followed by the 100 military yen printed in yellow-green in the style of the first series. And lastly, the first series 100 military yen printed in black. While all this was going on, my father languished in Century-Po prisoner of war camp from 1941 until April of 1944. On April 29, 1944, he, along with 47 Canadians and 137 Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps prisoners, were embarked on a ship called the Nauru Maru, bound for Japan. En route, stopped over in Formosa, then went through Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and arrived at Moji on May 27, 1944. This was the last prisoner transport to leave Hong Kong, and they were very lucky to arrive in Japan. Several Japanese transports with Allied prisoners en route to Japan were sunk by American submarines with a huge loss of POW lives. And this is because the Japanese refused to put a red cross on the side of the ship, so the Americans didn't know that they were holding prisoners. So as soon as the American submarines saw the ships, they just sank them, not knowing that the holds were just full of prisoners. He was sent by train to Sendai Camp No. 2 to work at the Iwaki coal mine, located in a village called Yoshima. There they mined coal in 2 12-hour shifts. Every night, each prisoner was allowed to bring back a 1-pound lump of coal to heat the barracks. Food usually consisted of barley mixed with rice, and for working down in the mine, they each also received a bun. The buns were either eaten or used as currency by the prisoners. 6 buns could be traded for a tin of corned beef or spam from the Red Cross parcels. Here's a photo of him in Japan on Christmas Day, 1944. In the photo, he is seated in the second row behind the goat. Note the Red Cross parcels. The Red Cross parcels did not arrive regularly, and often each parcel had to be shared among several prisoners. Very often, the Japanese guards pilfered the parcels for what they could use before giving the rest to the prisoners. Although the prisoners were also paid wages of 10 cents for each day they worked in a mine, there was nothing to buy in the camp, so it was used for gambling. The prisoners very often also used cigarettes from the Red Cross parcels as currency to acquire items from other prisoners. In the next picture, he's seated behind a white table. He's standing behind a white table, and is the person facing the other prisoners. He was in a church choir before the war, and he said he was leading the prisoners in singing Christmas carols. This is one entrance to the coal mine taken after the war on 28 August 1945. This picture was obtained from my brother-in-law, whose father was also a POW in the same camp. On August 15, 1945, Japan ceased hostilities, and I have 2 photos of my father taken on August 28, 1945. In the first photo, he's seated in the front row, third from the right, wearing the hat. In the second photo, he is seated in the middle row, second from the right. At that time, he was 24 years old, and he told me he only weighed 80 pounds. At war's end, the Japanese were asked to prepare a roster of prisoners in each camp. I found a copy of the Sendai Camp No. 2 roster on the internet. This excerpt lists my father third from the bottom as prisoner number 179. Another website provided me with an aerial view of Sendai Camp No. 2 taken on September 2nd by American planes as they dropped food supplies to the prisoners. Sadly, on that day, my dad told me that one American prisoner, Sergeant Joseph Sarata, died when one of the food pallets tore away from a parachute and hit him. The camp was liberated on September 7th and evacuated on September 9th. According to my father's POW index card, he was handed over to a Captain Candlewood at Port Yamato. Some of the ex-POWs were taken by train down to Yokohama, where they were processed for repatriation. This picture of aircraft carrier HMS Colossus's hangar shows the cots laying out to accommodate the former POWs. En route to Japan, the planes were pushed over the side to create space. This picture also came from my brother-in-law's files. The former POWs were taken to the Philippines for rest and recuperation for 2 weeks before being repatriated to Hong Kong. On September 1st, 1945, when the British military reassumed the administration of Hong Kong, the currency issue had to be resolved. But until new Hong Kong banknotes arrived, there was no option but to allow the circulation of the Japanese military yen to continue. The plates for a never-issued Japanese 1,000 yen note were found, and a decision was made by the British military administration to re-engrave the plates to strike through the 7 characters at a denomination of $1 and the phrase Hong Kong government. These were never issued and were eventually destroyed. Surviving examples are very valuable. In addition, stocks of the Central Reserve Bank of China 1,000 yuan notes and 5,000 yuan notes were discovered at the Chonghua Book Company in Kowloon. The 1,000 yuan notes were overprinted with Hong Kong government $5 and the 5,000 yuan notes with Hong Kong government $10. The overprinting and numbering was done by Yule Printery and were held in the vaults of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. However, before these notes could be released, government notes printed in the UK arrived. These overprinted notes were held until February 1946, and then they were burned. Records show 2.4 million $5 notes were overprinted. Again, surviving examples are very valuable. The Hong Kong government issued some of the earliest notes in 1945. There were 3 small uniface notes of 1 cent, 5 cents, and 10 cents. On September 6, 1945, the Japanese Ministry of Finance announced that all military yen notes were void. Overnight, the military yen literally became worthless pieces of money, worthless pieces of paper to the people of Hong Kong. On September 16, 1945, Japanese Major General Okada and Vice Admiral Fujita signed the instrument of surrender pictured on the right, which reads, "On behalf of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese Imperial Headquarters, we do hereby unconditionally surrender ourselves and all forces under our control to Rear Admiral Cecil Halliday Jepson Harcourt, CBCBE, and undertake to carry out all such instructions as may be given by him or under his authority, and to issue all necessary orders for the purpose of giving effect to his instructions." Well, before they could fully take over the administration of the colony, the British actually had to use the Japanese troops to keep law and order. And of course, they had a really fearful reputation among the population. So they kept law and order very well among the population until the British troops would come in and disarm them and put them in POW camps. On 29th August 1946, Hong Kong issued 2 stamps to commemorate the Allied victory. The stamps depicted the phoenix rising from the flames, symbolizing the rebuilding of Hong Kong after the war. So what happened to Kaneo Inouye? After the war ended in August 1945, Inouye was identified in Kowloon by liberated Canadian prisoners and was arrested. The Kamloops Kid was then tried for war crimes by a military tribunal for being involved in the deaths of several Canadian soldiers. He was convicted and sentenced to death. However, the verdict was overturned on appeal because as a Canadian citizen, he could not be prosecuted for war criminals committed by enemy soldiers. In April 1947, Inouye was tried on a criminal charge of treason. He was again found guilty, and on August 27, 1947, he was hanged at a Hong Kong prison. He was the only Canadian executed for treason in World War II. What happened to Lieutenant General Takashi Sakai? At the end of the war, the former military governor of Hong Kong was found guilty of war crimes in China and executed by firing squad on 30th September 1946. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation's first post-war notes were issued on March 30th, 1946. They consisted of the $5 note and $10 note, and here we have the $5 note. The Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China began reissuing notes in 1948 and consisted of the $5 and $10 notes. And here's the 5. The Mercantile Bank of India also resumed issuing notes in 1948, but were only in $100 denominations. My dad and mom got married on April 9th, 1947. In 1949, he was a member of the renamed Hong Kong Defence Force and became a marksman. In 1951, the Hong Kong Defence Force was granted the title Royal Hong Kong Defence Force. In 1961, the unit was renamed Hong Kong Regiment, and in 1970 to the Royal Hong Kong Regiment. On September 8, 1951, 49 nations signed the Treaty of San Francisco. It officially served to end the Second World War with Japan and became effective on April 25, 1952. Under the terms of the treaty, Japan agreed to reimburse the occupied nations and under Article 16 agreed to donate £4,500,000 to the Red Cross for POWs that suffered undue hardships. Remember Article 16 because it becomes relevant later. In 1958, Japan hosted the Third Asian Games in Tokyo and issued its first day cover with 4 commemorative stamps to celebrate the event. My father returned to Tokyo, this time as an athlete, representing Hong Kong at the Third Asian Games. He's pictured second from the right. At the Games, he won the bronze medal for Hong Kong in rifle shooting and is pictured on the podium. Here's a picture of his bronze medal. Unfortunately, we don't know where the medal's gone. No one in the family's got it. In addition to his bronze medal, he also received a third-place diploma. In 1959, Prince Philip visited Hong Kong, and on March 7th, he and my mother were both invited to meet him on board his yacht Britannia. In 1960, he represented Hong Kong at the Olympic Games in Rome. Here he is pictured with his on-shoulder competition rifle. The Hong Kong Olympic contingent only consisted of 5 athletes, 4 shooters and 1 swimmer. Here the Hong Kong contingent enters the Olympic Stadium. My father ranked 44th in his event. Italy did not issue any coins to commemorate the Olympics. Instead, they issued the following commemorative stamps and postcards, and my father had them mailed to himself at the Olympic Village. This is the souvenir postcard, and this is set number 1 and set number 2 of the postcard set. As you can see, it says Henry Souza, care of Hong Kong contingent, Olympic Village, Rome, Italy. This is set number 3 and number 4. And this is set number 5. Prior to the start of the 1964 Olympic Games, my father was one of 7 athletes interviewed for an article called the Tokyo Games, and it was published in the October 1964 issue of Sports Illustrated. He again represented Hong Kong at the Olympic Games in Tokyo and ranked 39th in his event. Japan issued 2 silver coins of 100 yen and 1,000 yen to commemorate the 1964 Olympics. In addition, they also issued 4 souvenir stamps that my father put on this postcard, and again had it mailed to himself at the Olympic Village. In 1966, he represented Hong Kong at the 5th Asian Games and came in 5th in his event. Thailand issued a 1 baht coin to commemorate the 5th Asian Games, and also issued 8 stamps shown here to commemorate the Games. Between 1950 and 1967, he entered numerous local shooting events and won over 200 awards. He became one of Hong Kong's premier sportsmen. He was also a member of the Hong Kong Regiment's sniper section, and he is shown here wearing camouflage headgear, taking a break from his training. If you look carefully, you can see the 2 .303 rifles with a scope here and over here. Here we have a picture of him with all his trophies and his match rifle. And of course, in the background, there's got to be a mahjong game. This is our family in 1967. He raised 6 children. And in 1968, our family immigrated to Vancouver, Canada. Because he was one of Hong Kong's noted sportsmen, his departure was reported in the newspaper. If we did not immigrate to Canada, he would have represented Hong Kong in the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City. In 1972, my parents celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. In September 1974, my sister gave, in 1973, one of our proudest moments in our family was that we all became Canadian citizens. In September 1974, my sister gave birth to her first son, and my parents became grandparents. This picture was taken on Christmas Day, 1974. 5 months later, in May 1975, at age 53, he died of a heart attack at home. But that's not quite the end of the story. On Christmas Day 1941, the UK issued this cover to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the capitulation of Hong Kong. And actually last year was the 80th anniversary. The issue was limited to 750 covers. In August 1995, the government disbanded the Royal Hong Kong Regiment in anticipation of the handover of Hong Kong to China on July 1st, 1997. The regiment was recognized for its 141 years of service to Hong Kong by the issuance of 4 commemorative stamps. In September 1995, the Philatelic Bureau of Hong Kong issued this cover to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the signing of the surrender documents and the liberation of Hong Kong. Only 88 of these special covers were issued. I think mine's number 75. Many civilians had kept wartime military yen and had been petitioning successive Japanese governments to redeem their military yen. Many of them had become destitute after being forced to trade Hong Kong dollars for their military yen. Even as late as 1999, court cases have been launched against the Japanese government. All were unsuccessful. Why? The Japanese government cited the 1951 Treaty of San Francisco that required Japan to reimburse nations that it occupied. And because these payments were made on a national level, there was no provision to reimburse the claimants on an individual level. As a result, many civilians that lived through the occupation went to their graves still possessing bundles of worthless Japanese yen. Many Far East veteran associations have also lobbied successive Japanese governments to reimburse them for their time spent as POWs and slave laborers. This time, the Japanese government cited Article 16 of the 1951 Treaty of San Francisco to deny payments. If you recall, Article 16 of the treaty required Japan to pay £4,500,000 to the Red Cross for POWs that suffered undue hardship. And that clause absolved Japan of all future compensation to POWs. In 2001, the British government decided to pay its surviving Far East POWs or their widows a one-time £10,000 payment to recognize their wartime suffering. But by the time, many veterans or the widows were no longer around to collect. In 2007, a researcher in Japan found documents in the National Library that Japan had been selling opium in China during the war to back the value of the military scrip that was issued. And finally, in 2016, the Royal Canadian Mint issued a $20 coin to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Canada's participation in defending Hong Kong in 1941. The obverse bears the wartime effigy of King George VI. Christmas 2021 was the 80th anniversary of the surrender of Hong Kong, and if my dad was still alive, he would have been 100. And that ends my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.